The luxury cruise ship Stellar Haven glided through the dark space between stars. Its hull gleamed silver under the distant light of nearby suns. Inside, the ship was filled with the galaxy's wealthiest beings. Snake-like Vorthok nobles slithered through the dining halls, wearing expensive jewelry. Crystal creatures called Zephyrians sparkled as they moved, their bodies catching the light from every angle. Bird-like Cathari merchants flapped their colorful wings as they discussed business. Deals worth millions of credits. Jake Martinez sat alone at a small table in the observation deck. He was one of only 12 humans aboard the massive ship. At 28 years old, Jake worked as a security consultant for mining companies on the Outer Rim worlds. He had saved enough money for this trip back to Earth to visit his sick mother. The other passengers gave him strange looks. Humans were still new to the galactic community. Many aliens found them disturbing to look at. Their smooth skin, their round eyes, their strange hair that grew only in certain places. Jake didn't mind the stares. He was used to being different. He sipped his coffee and watched the stars drift by through the massive windows. The Stellar Haven was supposed to be the safest ship in the galaxy. It had the best shields, the fastest engines, and a security system that could stop any threat. At least that's what the brochure said. The ship's captain was a tall, blue-skinned Altarian named Vexstar. He had been running luxury cruises for over 50 years without a single incident. The crew was made up of different alien species, all trained to handle any emergency. They wore crisp, white uniforms and spoke in soft, polite voices to the passengers in the main dining hall. A Vorthok noble named Seshik was telling other passengers about his art collection. His snake-like body was covered in golden scales, and his eyes were like black diamonds. He owned 17 planets and had enough wealth to buy entire star systems. Next to him sat a Zephyrian family. Their crystal bodies rang like bells when they laughed. Their children, small and bright like living gems, played games with light patterns that danced across their skin. A group of Cathari merchants sat at another table. Their feathers were bright red and blue, and they spoke in quick, chirping voices about trade routes and profit margins. It had beaks like eagles and talons that could tear through metal. But they were peaceful beings who preferred to solve problems with words rather than violence. Jake finished his coffee and decided to walk around the ship. The Stellar Haven was huge, with dozens of levels and hundreds of rooms. It had swimming, pools, shopping centers, theaters, and even a small park with real trees from different worlds. Most of the passengers were in the upper levels, enjoying the expensive restaurants and entertainment. As Jake walked through a quiet corridor on level 7, he heard a strange sound. It was like metal being torn apart. The lights flickered, and the ship shuddered. An alarm began to sound, but it was different from the usual safety drills. This alarm was sharp and urgent. The ship's intercom crackled to life. Captain Vexter's voice was calm but serious. "Attention passengers and crew, we are experiencing a minor technical difficulty. Please remain calm and return to your rooms. This is not a drill." But Jake knew it wasn't a technical problem. He had heard that sound before during his work on mining stations. It was the sound of ships being forcibly docked together. Someone was boarding the Stellar Haven. The lights went out completely. Emergency. Lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a red glow. Jake heard screaming from the upper levels. Then came the sound of energy weapons being fired. The ship shook again, harder this time. Jake ran toward the nearest stairwell. He needed to get to the upper levels where the passengers were. As he climbed, he could hear more sounds of fighting. Alien voices shouted in languages he didn't recognize. Some were crying for help. When Jake reached level 12, he saw them. Pirates from the Crimson Nebula had broken through the ship's hull. They wore black armor and carried weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Their faces were hidden behind masks, but Jake could see they were different species working together. Some were tall and thin, others short and thick. All of them moved with the confidence of beings who had done this many times before. The pirates were herding passengers into the main dining hall. The wealthy aliens who had been so proud and confident just minutes before were now terrified. The Vorthok noble Seshik was coiled on the floor, his golden scales dim with fear. The Zephyrian family huddled together, their crystal bodies flickering weakly. The Cathari merchants had their wings pressed tight against their bodies, making themselves as small as possible. One of the pirates, a large creature with 4 arms and gray skin, was shouting orders. "Get all the valuable ones in here. Check their identification. The rich ones go to the cargo hold. The rest can stay here and behave." Jake stayed hidden behind a pillar, watching. He counted at least 20 pirates spread throughout the dining hall. They had energy rifles and plasma pistols. Some carried strange devices that looked like they could cut through metal or disable electronics. A small Zephyrian child, no bigger than a human baby, started to cry. The sound was like tiny bells ringing in distress. One of the pirates walked over and raised his weapon. "Shut that thing up, or I'll shut it up myself." The child's mother, a beautiful crystal being, held her baby closer.
"Please."
"She's just scared. She doesn't understand what's happening." The pirate laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "Then maybe you should have stayed home, instead of flaunting your wealth across the galaxy." Jake felt something hot and angry rise in his chest. He had seen enough. These weren't soldiers fighting a war. They were bullies picking on innocent people who couldn't fight back. Every instinct in his body told him to act. But he was just one man against 20 armed pirates. He had no weapons except his hands and whatever he could find on the ship. Any smart person would hide and wait for help to arrive. Any reasonable person would think about their own safety first. Jake Martinez had been born on Earth. He had grown up in the slums of New Detroit, where you learned to fight or you didn't survive. He had served in the Terran Defense Force for 6 years, fighting in 3 different wars on worlds most people had never heard of. He had worked security in the most dangerous parts of the galaxy, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He was not smart or reasonable. He was human. Jake looked around for anything he could use as a weapon. The ship's corridors had fire extinguishers mounted on the walls. There were emergency toolkits in every section. The kitchen would have knives and other sharp objects. He was careful and used his head. He might be able to take out a few pirates before they knew what was happening. The 4-armed pirate was still threatening the Zephyrian family. He had moved closer, and Jake could see he was enjoying their fear. Other pirates were searching the passengers, taking jewelry and credit chips. They were so focused on their victims that they weren't watching for threats. Jake pulled a fire extinguisher from the wall. It was heavy and had a long hose attached. Not much of a weapon, but it would have to do. He also grabbed a wrench from an emergency toolkit. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady. He had done this kind of thing before. The pirate raised his weapon toward the crying child. "Last warning. Make it stop or I will." Jake stepped out from behind the pillar. "Hey!" The pirate turned around, surprised. He saw a human male, in simple clothes, holding a fire extinguisher and a wrench. The pirate started to laugh. "What's this? A passenger thinks he's a hero." Jake activated the fire extinguisher and sprayed white foam directly into the pirate's face. The creature stumbled backward, clawing at his eyes. Jake swung the wrench as hard as he could, connecting with the side of the pirate's head. The creature dropped his weapon and fell to the floor. Every alien in the room, pirate and passenger alike, stared at Jake in shock. For a moment, nobody moved, and all hell broke loose. The other pirates turned their weapons toward Jake. Energy beams lit up the dining hall as they fired at him. Jake rolled behind an overturned table, dragging the unconscious 4-armed pirate's weapon with him. The passengers screamed and scattered. In all directions, Jake had fought in enough battles to know that standing still meant death. He kept moving, using the chaos to his advantage. The pirates were shouting at each other in different languages, confused about where the attack was. Coming from, they had expected easy victims, not a fight. A tall, thin pirate with green skin moved toward Jake's position. Jake waited until the creature was close, then grabbed a metal serving tray from the floor. He threw it like a disc, spinning through the air. It hit the pirate in the throat, and the creature stumbled backward. Gasping for breath, Jake picked up the fallen pirate's weapon and rolled to a new position. He had never used this type of energy rifle before, but weapons were weapons. He found the trigger and fired at a group of pirates who were trying to surround him. The beam struck a wall panel, causing sparks to fly everywhere. Two more pirates rushed toward him from different directions. Jake grabbed a chair and threw it at one, then tackled the other. They hit the ground hard, rolling across the floor.
Ow.
The pirate was stronger than Jake, but Jake fought dirty. He used his elbow to strike the creature's face, then his knee too. Hit its stomach. Pirate tried to grab Jake's throat, but Jake bit the creature's hand until it let go. The alien passengers watched in horror and amazement. They had never seen anything like this before. Most galactic species had evolved past the need for physical violence. They settled disputes with words, laws, and technology. The idea of using teeth and fists to fight seemed savage and primitive. Jake stood up, breathing hard.
Oh.
Blood ran from cuts on his face and arms. He had the pirate's weapon now, but there were still 15 more enemies in the room. The passengers were huddled in corners, too scared to move. Some were injured from the crossfire. The lead pirate, a massive creature with red skin and horns, shouted orders to his crew. Kill the human. Forget about taking him alive. He's too dangerous. But Jake wasn't just fighting randomly. He was thinking, planning, using his environment. The dining hall had serving stations with hot food and boiling liquids. There were heavy decorations that could be pulled down. The floor was smooth and could be slippery if something was spilled on it. Jake shot out the lights above the serving station, plunging that section of room into darkness. Then he grabbed a pot of hot soup and threw it at the nearest pirate. The creature screamed as the boiling liquid hit its face. Jake used the distraction to reach the kitchen area, where he found more tools to use as weapons. The kitchen had knives, but also things the pirates wouldn't expect. Cleaning chemicals that could blind someone if mixed together. Heavy pots and pans that could knock someone unconscious. A freezer unit that could trap someone inside. 3 pirates followed Jake into the kitchen. They spread out, trying to corner him. Jake turned on all the gas burners, filling the air with invisible danger. Then he threw a metal spatula at the light switch, turning off the power. In the darkness, he could hear the pirates moving, but they couldn't see him. Jake had grown up in places where the lights didn't always work. He knew how to fight in the dark. He moved quietly, using sounds to locate his enemies. When one pirate got too close, Jake grabbed him from behind and put him in a sleeper hold. The creature struggled for a few seconds, then went limp. Another pirate fired his weapon randomly, trying to hit Jake. The energy beam struck the gas line, causing a small explosion. Fire spread across the ceiling, giving just enough light for Jake to see his remaining enemies. He threw a heavy pot at one, then tackled the other. The fight was brutal and fast. Jake used everything he had learned in years of combat. He fought with his hands, his feet, his teeth when necessary. He used broken dishes as cutting tools and hot pans as shields. The pirates were strong and had better weapons, but they weren't. Used to this kind of fighting, when Jake emerged from the kitchen, he was covered in blood and burns. Some of it was his own, some belonged to his enemies. The remaining pirates in the dining hall looked at him with fear and confusion. This wasn't how their raids usually went. Jake picked up weapons from the fallen pirates and started moving toward the passengers. He needed to get them to safety before more enemies arrived. The Zephyrian family was still huddled together, their crystal bodies flickering with terror. The Vorthok noble was injured, green blood seeping from cuts on his scales. "Can you move?" Jake asked the passengers. His voice was rough from smoke and shouting. Most of them just stared at him. A few nodded weakly. They were in shock from what they had witnessed. The violence, the blood, the savage way Jake fought, it was beyond their understanding. An old Cathari merchant named Weep spoke up. His voice trembled like a frightened bird. "Are you going to hurt us too?" Jake looked confused. "What?" "No, I'm trying to help you." But the aliens saw something different. They saw a creature covered in blood, holding stolen weapons surrounded by the bodies of his enemies. They saw someone who had fought with a brutality they couldn't comprehend. To them, Jake looked more dangerous than the pirates, the ships. Alarms were still sounding. Jake could hear more fighting in other parts of the Stellar Haven. The pirates had split up to search for valuable passengers and cargo. Jake needed to find the other humans on board and organize a defense. "Stay here," Jake told the passengers. "Hide behind the tables. Don't come out until security arrives." He left the dining hall and moved through the ship's corridors. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls. Jake found 2 more groups of passengers being held by pirates. Each time, he used different tactics. In one corridor, he disabled the artificial gravity, causing the pirates to float helplessly while he fought them. In another area, he used the ship's ventilation system to move unseen above his enemies. Every fight was different, but the result was the same. Jake won through violence, speed, and tactics that seemed impossible to the watching aliens. He moved like a predator, struck like a wild animal, and showed a capacity for mayhem that terrified everyone who saw him. When Galactic security forces finally arrived, they found a ship full of traumatized passengers and unconscious pirates. Jake was sitting in the main corridor, tending to his wounds with a first aid kit. He had stripped the pirates of their weapons and tied them up with cables from the ship's electronics. The security team was led by Commander Lisa Park, a human woman who worked for the Galactic Peace Corps. She took one look at the scene and knew there would be trouble. The alien passengers were describing Jake as a monster, a savage beast who had fought with inhuman brutality. What happened here?" Commander Park asked Jake. Jake looked up from bandaging his arm. "Pirates boarded the ship. I helped the passengers. Helped them." The Vorthok noble Seshik had recovered enough to speak. His voice was full of fear and disgust. He tore through those pirates like a wild animal. He used his teeth, his claws, everything. It was horrible to watch. "I don't have claws," Jake said quietly. "I was protecting you, but the damage was already done." The alien witnesses had seen something that challenged everything they believed about civilized behavior. They had watched a being fight with primitive weapons and brutal tactics, using violence in ways they thought had been left behind thousands of years ago. The security team arrested Jake, along with the pirates. The aliens demanded it, claiming they felt unsafe with him free. As Jake was led away in restraints, he could hear the passengers talking about him in frightened whispers. They called him a beast, a savage, a creature too dangerous to be allowed. Among civilized beings, Commander Park looked troubled as she filed her report. She knew Jake had saved lives, but she also knew the political reality. The alien governments would demand answers. They would want to know if all humans were capable of such violence. They would question whether Earth should be allowed to remain. In the galactic community, Jake sat in the security holding cell, confused and angry. He had done what any human would do, protect innocent people from those who would harm them, but instead of gratitude, he had earned fear and suspicion. The very qualities that made him effective in combat were now being used against him. Ship arrived at Nexus Prime 3 days later. Jake was transferred to the maximum security detention facility, where he would await trial for charges that hadn't even been decided yet. The galaxy wanted answers about the savage human who had fought like a wild animal to save their lives. The Nexus Prime Detention Center was the most secure prison in the galaxy. It sat on an asteroid floating in dead space, surrounded by defense platforms and patrol ships. The facility held the worst criminals from 1,000 different worlds. Murderers, war criminals, beings too dangerous to be allowed anywhere near civilized society. Jake Martinez was brought to the prison in heavy restraints. Energy shackles covered his arms and legs, making it impossible for him to move quickly. A neural dampener was attached to his neck, designed to prevent any aggressive thoughts from turning into action. The guards treated him like he might explode at any moment. The prison's commander was a woman named Vera Ashworth. She was human, but she had been born on one of the outer colonies. She had never seen Earth, and she looked at Jake with cold, professional interest. Commander Ashworth had been running the detention center for 15 years. She had dealt with every type of dangerous being the galaxy could produce. "So you're the one they're calling the Earth Beast," she said, reading from a datapad. "Took down 23 armed pirates using nothing but improvised weapons and hand-to-hand combat." Jake sat in the metal chair across from her desk. Interrogation room was small and gray, with cameras watching from every angle. I was protecting innocent people. That's what any decent person would do. Commander Ashworth raised an eyebrow. Any decent human, maybe, but the aliens don't see it that way. They think you're a monster who needs to be locked up forever. What do you think? Jake asked. I think you're either the most dangerous man alive, or you're just a soldier who did his job. I haven't decided yet. Jake was assigned to Cell Block 7, the maximum security section. His cellmate was a creature called Gorthak the Destroyer. Gorthak was 9 feet tall and covered in thick gray hide. He had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could tear through steel. His face looked like it had been carved from stone, with red eyes that glowed in the dark. Gorthak had been a war leader for the Bruthan Empire. He had conquered 17 worlds and killed over 1 million beings in battle. He was sentenced to life in prison after his empire fell. The other inmates feared him almost as much as the guards did. When Jake was brought to the cell, Gorthak was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He didn't look at the human for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. So you are the beast they speak of, Gorthak said. You look small and weak to me. Jake sat on his own bunk and said nothing. He had learned long ago that the best way to deal with bullies was to ignore them until they lost interest or decided to fight. They say you killed 23 warriors with your bare hands, Gorthak continued. They say you fought like a wild animal, using teeth and claws. I don't have claws, Jake said quietly. Gorthak sat up and looked at Jake's hands, at the human's. Fingers were small and soft compared to the alien's massive talons. Then how did you fight so many enemies? I used my brain, Jake said, and I didn't kill any of them. I just knocked them out. This seemed to confuse Gorthak. In his culture, enemies were killed or they would return to fight again later. The idea of showing mercy to those who threaten innocent lives made no sense to him. The days in prison were long and boring. Jake spent most of his time reading books from the prison library. He read about galactic history, alien cultures, and legal systems. He was trying to understand why the other species were so afraid of human behavior. Dr. Helen Carter arrived at the prison 2 weeks after Jake was brought there. She was a xenopsychologist, someone who studied the minds of different alien species. She had been hired by the galactic government to evaluate Jake and determine if he was mentally stable. Dr. Carter was in her 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes. She had spent most of her career studying how different species thought and felt. She had never worked with a human before, but she had read all the available research about Earth psychology. Hello, Jake, she said when they met in the interview room. I'm Dr. Carter. I'm here to talk with you about what happened on the cruise ship. Jake looked at her suspiciously. Are you going to ask me if I'm crazy? Because everyone else seems to think I am. I don't think you're crazy, Dr. Carter said. But I do think you're different from the other species in ways that scare them. I want to understand those differences. Over the next several days, Dr. Carter interviewed Jake for hours at a time. She asked him about his childhood on Earth, his military service, and his work in the outer colonies. She wanted to know how humans thought about violence, survival, and protecting others. Jake told her about growing up in the slums of New Detroit, where gangs controlled the streets and the police rarely came. He explained how children learned to fight or they didn't survive to become adults. He described the constant danger, the need to be alert at all times, and the bonds formed between people who protected each other. On Earth, we have a saying, Jake said. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. When I saw those pirates threatening innocent families, I couldn't just stand by and watch. Dr. Carter took notes as Jake spoke. She was beginning to understand that human behavior wasn't savage or primitive. It was the result of millions of years of evolution on a dangerous world. Humans had survived by being tough, adaptable, and willing to fight when necessary. Tell me about the fight itself, Dr. Carter said. What were you thinking when you attacked the pirates? Jake closed his eyes, remembering. I wasn't thinking much at all. It was mostly instinct. See the threat? Eliminate the threat. Protect the innocent. I've been trained to do it so many times that it's automatic. But you didn't kill any of them, Dr. Carter pointed out.
Even though you could have.
Killing should be the last choice, not the first, Jake said.
Uh,
I disabled them so they couldn't hurt anyone else. That was enough. This was the part that confused the alien witnesses the most. They had seen Jake fight with incredible violence, but he had carefully avoided using lethal force. He had knocked out enemies who could have been killed just as easily. To them, it seemed like the behavior of a predator playing with its prey. Dr. Carter also spent time interviewing the other inmates. She wanted to know what they thought of Jake after living with him for several weeks. The results surprised her. Gorthok, the feared war criminal, had developed a strange respect for his human cellmate. He is not what I expected, the alien said. He shares his food with me even though I am his enemy. He helped treat my wounds when the guards would not. He tells me stories of his world, of philosophers and teachers who spoke of peace. Other inmates had similar stories. Jake had broken up fights between prisoners, helped injured aliens get medical attention, and even taught some of them to read Galactic Standard Language. The behavior didn't match the image of a savage beast that the galaxy had created, but the most important discovery came. When Dr. Carter reviewed the security footage from the cruise ship, the prison had obtained copies of all the recordings, including ones that hadn't been shown to the public. What she saw changed everything. The footage showed Jake moving through the ship with careful precision. He checked on every passenger he rescued, making sure they weren't seriously injured. He used minimal force whenever possible, always looking for ways to end fights without causing permanent damage. When he found children hiding in storage rooms, he spoke to them gently and carried them to safety. The media had only shown the most violent moments, the scenes that looked most savage to alien eyes. They hadn't shown Jake comforting a crying child or sharing his water with wounded passengers. They hadn't shown him organizing survivors and teaching them basic first aid. Dr. Carter realized that the galaxy's fear of Jake wasn't based on what he had actually done. It was based on how his actions looked to species that had never experienced real violence. To them, any physical aggression seemed brutal and terrifying. She began working on her report, knowing that her findings could change everything. Jake wasn't a monster or a savage beast. He was a protector, someone who had been shaped by a harsh world to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. The galaxy needed to understand the difference between violence for its own sake and violence used to protect the innocent. But first, she had to convince the authorities to look at the evidence with fresh eyes. And that would be the hardest battle of all. 3 months after Jake arrived at the prison, his trial finally began. The courtroom was the largest on Nexus Prime, built to handle cases that affected the entire galaxy. Representatives from dozens of alien governments came to watch. News crews from every major network set up cameras to broadcast the proceedings across known space. The prosecutor was a Vorthok named Zalthek. He was tall and thin, with golden scales that caught the light whenever he moved. His snake-like eyes were cold and calculating. Zalthek had never lost a case in 40 years of practice. He was known for his ability to make juries fear the defendants he prosecuted. Jake's lawyer was Maria Santos, a human woman who had traveled from Earth to represent him. She was young, only 32 years old, but she had studied galactic law. For 10 years, this was the biggest case of her career. And she knew that the future of human-alien relations might depend on the outcome. The courtroom was packed with observers. Alien journalists whispered to each other in dozens of different languages. Government officials took notes on everything that was said. Security guards stood at every entrance, watching for any sign of trouble. Judge Krellian was a member of the Wise Ones, an ancient species known for their fairness and intelligence. He had been chosen to oversee the trial because he had no political connections to any of the governments involved. His skin was blue-gray, and his large eyes seemed to see everything at once. Prosecutor Zelthak stood up to give his opening statement. His voice was smooth and dangerous, like a snake preparing to strike. Members of the jury, we are here today because a dangerous predator was allowed to travel freely among civilized beings. The defendant, Jake Martinez, represents everything that is wrong with the species called humans. Zalthek activated a holographic display that showed images from the cruise ship. The pictures had been carefully selected to make Jake look as violent as possible. They showed him covered in blood, holding weapons, standing over unconscious enemies. "Look at these images," Zeltha continued. "This is not the behavior of a civilized being. This is the behavior of a wild animal." Defendant used primitive weapons, brutal tactics, and savage violence to achieve his goals. He fought like a beast from the dark ages of galactic history. The prosecutor played video clips that had been edited to remove all context. They showed Jake striking enemies with improvised weapons, tackling pirates to the ground, and moving through the ship like a hunter stalking prey. The alien jury members looked disturbed by what they saw. "The defendant claims he was protecting innocent passengers," Zolthek said. "But protection does not require this level of brutality. A civilized being would have called for help, hidden with the other passengers, or, at most, tried to negotiate with the attackers. Instead, the defendant chose violence as his first option." Walked closer to the jury box. "The question before us today is not whether the defendant's actions were effective. The question is whether such savage behavior can be tolerated in a civilized galaxy. I submit to you that it cannot. The defendant is a threat to every peaceful being in known space." The prosecutor sat down, and Maria Santos stood up to present Jake's defense. She looked small and nervous compared to the imposing Vorthok, but her voice was strong and clear. "Members of the jury, you have just seen carefully edited footage designed to make my client look like a monster. But you haven't seen the whole truth. You haven't seen what really happened on that cruise ship, and you haven't learned what it means to be human." Maria activated her own holographic display. This one showed the complete, unedited security footage from the ship. The jury watched as Jake carefully avoided killing his enemies, checked on wounded passengers, and organized the evacuation of civilians. "My client didn't choose violence as his first option," Maria said. "He chose protection as his only option. When he saw innocent families being threatened by armed criminals, he did what any decent person would do. He acted to save lives." Defense lawyer played footage of Jake comforting frightened children, sharing his water with injured passengers, and teaching survivors basic first aid. She showed him carefully moving through the ship, always checking to make sure civilians were safe before engaging with enemies. "You've heard the prosecutor call my client a savage beast," Maria continued. "But what kind of beast stops in the middle of a fight to bandage a wounded enemy? What kind of monster risks his own life to save alien children he's never met before?" Helen Carter was called as the first witness for the defense. She had spent months studying Jake and preparing her testimony. When she took the stand, she looked directly at the jury as she spoke. "I have interviewed the defendant extensively," Dr. Carter said. "I have also studied human psychology and the evolutionary history of Earth. What I have found is that humans are not savage beasts. They are a species that evolved to be protectors." Dr. Carter explained how Earth's dangerous environment had shaped human behavior over millions of years. She described how humans had survived by working together, protecting their families, and being willing to fight when peaceful solutions weren't possible. "The defendant's actions on the cruise ship were not the result of savage instincts," Dr. Carter said. "They were the result of evolved protective behaviors that have allowed humans to survive and thrive on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy." The prosecutor objected several times during Dr. Carter's testimony, claiming that human evolution was not relevant to the case. But Judge Krelian allowed her to continue, saying that understanding the defendant's motivations was crucial too. Determining his guilt or innocence, the next witness was Captain Vextar from the cruise ship. The tall, blue-skinned Altarian looked uncomfortable as he took the stand. He had been running luxury cruises for 50 years without incident, and the pirate attack had damaged his reputation. Captain Vextar Maria Santos said, "How many passengers were aboard your ship when it was attacked?" 2,437, the captain replied. "And how many were killed during the attack?" The captain's voice was quiet. "None were killed." "How many were seriously injured?" 43 passengers suffered minor injuries. Most were caused by falling or being knocked down during the panic. Only 6 required medical treatment. Maria Santos walked closer to the witness stand.
Hey, Captain.
"In your professional opinion, What would have happened if my client had not intervened? Captain Vexstar was silent for a long moment. The pirates were becoming frustrated with the passengers' fear. They had already threatened to start killing people to make the others cooperate. If the defendant had not acted, I believe many innocent beings would have died. The defense also called several passengers from the cruise ship to testify. Most of them were still frightened by what they had witnessed, but they admitted that Jake had saved their lives. The Zephyrian mother whose child had been threatened by the pirates spoke through a translator. The human was terrifying to watch, she said. He moved like nothing I had ever seen before. But when the fighting was over, he was gentle with my daughter. He gave her candy from his pocket and told her everything would be okay. An old Cathari merchant named Weep also testified. I was certain the pirates would kill us all. We are not fighters. We do not know how to defend ourselves. The human did what none of us could do. He protected us when we could not protect ourselves. But the most surprising witness was Gorthak the Destroyer. The massive war criminal had asked to testify on Jake's behalf, despite being one of the most feared beings in the galaxy. When he took the stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. I have killed many beings in my life, Gorthak said in his grinding voice. I understand violence and those who use it. The human is not like me. He does not kill for pleasure or power. He fights only to protect others. Gorthak looked directly at Jake as he continued. In our cell, he shares his food with me even though I am his enemy. He tends to my wounds when the guards will not. He tells me stories of humans who chose peace over war, wisdom over strength. This is not the behavior of a savage beast. The war criminal's testimony shocked everyone in the courtroom. If Gorthak the Destroyer, who had conquered worlds and killed millions, could see the difference between Jake's protective violence and true savagery, then perhaps the jury could see it too, as the trial continued. More evidence emerged that supported Jake's character. Security footage showed him helping injured guards after the fighting ended. Medical reports proved that all the pirates he had fought were alive and would recover fully. Witness statements described his calm behavior and concern for others, but the most dramatic moment came when the trial was interrupted by an emergency alert. The prison's alarm system began blaring, and red lights flashed throughout the building. Commander Ashworth's voice came over the intercom system. All personnel to emergency stations. We have a code black situation. Multiple prisoners have escaped from maximum security. This is not a drill. Through the courtroom windows, everyone could see explosions in the distance. Smoke was rising from several sections of the prison complex. The sounds of energy weapons and shouting voices could be heard even inside the heavily fortified courthouse. The Crimson Abila pirates had returned. They had come to rescue their captured comrades and exact revenge on the prison that held them. The explosions grew louder as the Crimson Nebula pirates blasted their way through the prison's outer defenses. Through the courthouse windows, everyone could see black ships hovering above the facility, firing energy beams at the guard towers. Smoke and flames rose from multiple sections of the complex. Judge Krellian tried to maintain order in the courtroom. All civilians will evacuate to the emergency shelters. Security personnel will escort the jury and court officials to safety. Guards will return the defendant to his cell. But Jake stood up before the guards could reach him. Your Honor, with respect, putting me back in a cell won't help anyone right now. Those pirates are here for revenge, and they're going to hurt a lot of innocent people to get it. Commander Ashworth's voice came over the intercom again. All available personnel report to defensive positions. The pirates have breached sectors 4, 7, and 12. We have casualties and need immediate backup. The alien jury members were terrified. Most of them had never experienced real violence before, huddled together, making frightened sounds in their native languages. The Zephyrian representatives were flickering weakly, their crystal bodies dim with fear. The Vorthok officials had coiled themselves into tight spirals, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Maria Santos looked at Jake with concern. What are you thinking? Jake was already calculating the situation in his mind. The prison was under attack by the same pirates he had fought on the cruise ship. They knew the layout of the facility because some of their members had been held here. The guards were outnumbered and fighting a defensive battle they couldn't win. I'm thinking that sitting in a shelter while people die isn't what humans do, Jake said. Dr. Carter stepped forward. Jake, you're still on trial. If you leave this courtroom, it could be seen as an escape attempt. And if I stay here while innocent people get killed, I'll never be able to live with myself, Jake replied. Judge Krellian looked uncertain. The situation was unprecedented in galactic legal history. But another explosion, closer this time, helped him make his decision. Mr. Martinez, if you assist in the defense of this facility, it will be taken into consideration by this court. Nodded and turned to Commander Ashworth, who had entered the courtroom with several guards. Commander, I need weapons and tactical information. How many pirates are we dealing with? Commander Ashworth studied Jake's face. She had been watching him for months, trying to decide if he was really dangerous. Now she had to trust her instincts. At least 60 pirates in the first wave. We've got heavy weapons and know our security systems. Half my guards are down, and the rest are pinned in defensive positions. What about the other prisoners? Jake asked. Most are locked in their cells, but some have escaped in the confusion. We're fighting a war on multiple fronts. Jake thought quickly. I need to get to the maximum security block. We can organize the guards there and secure the heavy weapons. Locker, we can start pushing back. That sector is cut off, Commander Ashworth said. The pirates control the main corridors leading to it. Then I'll have to go through the maintenance tunnels, Jake said. I've had 3 months to study the layout of this place. Dr. Carter grabbed Jake's arm. This is exactly what the prosecutor said you would do. You're choosing violence again. Jake looked at her sadly. Dr. Carter, you've spent months trying to understand humans. We don't choose violence. We choose to protect people who can't protect themselves. Sometimes that requires fighting, and sometimes it doesn't. But we never choose to let innocent people suffer when we can do something about it. Commander Ashworth made her decision. She handed Jake an energy rifle and a communication device. Channel 7 for guard frequencies. Try not to get yourself killed. Your trial isn't over yet. Jake took the weapon and headed for the maintenance access panel. As he worked to remove the cover, he could hear the jury members whispering to each other. They were watching him prepare for another battle, and their fear was obvious. Prosecutor Zelthik spoke up. This proves my point exactly. The defendant cannot control his violent impulses. Even in a courtroom surrounded by law and order, he chooses to fight. Jake paused and looked back at the prosecutor. I'm not fighting because I want to. I'm fighting because people will die if I don't. That's what you don't understand about humans. We don't see violence and peace as opposites. We see them as tools that can be used for good or evil. Jake disappeared into the maintenance tunnel, leaving the courtroom behind. The tunnels were dark and narrow, barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. He could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the metal walls. Energy weapons firing, explosions, and the shouts of guards and pirates as Jake moved through. The tunnels, he used his communication device to coordinate with the scattered guard units. He had learned the names and positions of most personnel during his months in prison. Now he put that knowledge to use. Unit 7, this is Jake Martinez. I'm moving toward your position through tunnel access point 12. What's your status, Martinez? The prisoner? The guard's voice sounded confused. We're pinned down in storage bay, for pirates have us surrounded. It can create a distraction from behind their position. When you hear the explosion, move to defensive position Alpha. Jake reached the storage bay and carefully observed the situation through a ventilation grate. 5 pirates had cornered 3 guards behind some metal containers. The guards were running low on ammunition and had nowhere to retreat. Jake opened the grate silently and dropped into the room behind the pirates. He moved quickly and quietly, using techniques he had learned in military training. The first pirate never knew what hit him. Jake struck him with the butt of his rifle, and the creature dropped unconscious. The second pirate turned when he heard the noise, but Jake was already moving. He tackled the alien, and they rolled across the floor together. The pirate was stronger than Jake, but Jake fought smarter. He used pressure points and joint locks to disable his opponent without causing permanent damage. The remaining 3 pirates realized they were under attack from behind. They turned their weapons toward Jake, but the guards took advantage of the distraction. In seconds, the fight was over. How did you get here? One of the guards asked Jake. This section was supposed to be sealed off. Maintenance tunnels, Jake said. The pirates don't know about them because they're only on the classified building plans. We can use them to move around without being detected. Jake spent the next 2 hours moving through the prison, coordinating rescue operations and leading counterattacks against the pirates. He organized the guards into effective fighting units, taught them guerrilla tactics, and used his knowledge of the building to outmaneuver the enemy. But Jake wasn't just fighting. He was also protecting. When he found civilians trapped in the visitor center, he organized their evacuation. When he discovered wounded guards, he provided first aid and called for medical assistance. When escaped prisoners tried to join the chaos, he talked them into surrendering peacefully. The alien jury members watched the battle through security monitors in their emergency shelter. They saw Jake moving through the prison, but this time, they saw the complete picture. They watched him spare enemies who surrendered, protect wounded pirates from revenge attacks, and risk his life to save guards who had been treating him as a dangerous criminal. Dr. Carter provided commentary as they watched. Notice how he fights. Every action is calculated to minimize harm while maximizing effectiveness. He's not being savage or brutal. He's being precise. In the main corridor, Jake found himself face to face with the pirate leader, the same red-skinned creature who had ordered his crew to kill all witnesses on the cruise ship. The alien was bigger and stronger than Jake, with natural armor that could stop energy beams. So the little human wants to play hero again, the pirate leader sneered. This time, there won't be any passengers to hide behind. Jake didn't respond. With words, he had learned that pirates respected only strength. But instead of attacking directly, he used the environment to his advantage, shot out the lights, activated the fire suppression system, and used the confusion to get close to his enemy. The fight was brutal but short. Jake had spent 3 months in prison getting stronger and learning new techniques from his fellow inmates. When it was over, the pirate leader was unconscious and secured with restraints. Commander Ashworth's voice came over the communication system. All pirates have been captured or neutralized. Facility is secure. All personnel report for head count and medical evaluation. Jake made his way back to the courthouse, where the trial was still technically in session. He was tired, dirty, and had several new cuts and bruises. But he was also calm and satisfied. No innocent people had died on his watch. Judge Krellian looked at Jake as he entered the courtroom. "Mr. Martinez, are you ready to hear the jury's verdict?" The jury had deliberated for less than an hour. Their foreman, an elderly wise one, stood to announce their decision. "We find the defendant not guilty of all charges. Furthermore, we recommend that the Galactic government formally apologize for the treatment he has received." Prosecutor Zelthek looked stunned. "But he fought again. He used violence again. How can you ignore that?"